Hi, folks. This week we had the opportunity to sit down with the Jackson County Jail Commander, Captain Josh Aldrich, talk to us about everything from jail structure, how the current jail operates. And we want to dedicate this edition of our podcast to the men and women that work for the Jackson County Jail, both with badges and behind the scenes with records and lots of other things, mental health, addiction treatment assessments and whatnot. So we appreciate what they do, and we hope you enjoy this discussion. And please do share it with your friends, because it would be good to perpetuate a little bit of real information, facts about what goes on with the Jackson County Jail and where we stand with incarceration and crimes and justice in our county. I wanted to take a moment to thank some of the businesses that you'll see on the screen that help make it possible that we do these kind of things, both video and tracking crime in Southern Oregon.
So the sheriff is the primary elected official. He's the boss of the entire agency. In our agency, the rank structure, then it goes to two captains. And so I'm the captain of the Corrections Bureau. That's about half of the positions at the sheriff's office. So I'm in charge of all of the deputies who work in the jail, the support staff, the record staff that works within the facility, and then some of the court security functions that we have that are on the periphery of that.
Oh, yeah.
And then the other captain, Captain Tim Snaith, is in charge of the patrol type folks, the support detectives, search and rescue, those things.
Two houses.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously we work closely together constantly, but really that's just kind of the delineation of the command, how it works.
That makes a lot of sense. So how long have you been in law enforcement and working for the sheriff's department and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So I just had my 20th year with the sheriff's office back in January. So
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great. It went fast. It's incredible how quickly things have went by. I've had the opportunity to do lots of different things. I started off in the jail, realized pretty quickly that was actually a lot more enjoyable than I thought that it would be, right?
Interesting, for sure. I think it would be very interesting.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, when they get into law enforcement, especially young people, I came straight out of the Army and I went to work for the sheriff's office.
Served your country as well.
Yeah, it was great. And so I think a lot of people think that their path is to become a patrol officer. And for a lot of people, that is great. What I realized pretty quickly when I got into the jail was that there was this kind of sociological piece that most people don't recognize happen in a community. And I got the opportunity quickly to recognize the fact that most of the people who are in our jail because they've allegedly committed a crime, they're kind of pretty close to the rest of us, right? They just made some bad choices.
Exactly.
And getting the opportunity to spend time with those folks and talk to them about their choices and recognize that you had a potential to maybe help some people on the right path.
Yeah.
I realized pretty quickly that I enjoyed that. And then also, you're doing your part to keep the community safe by keeping those people who are kind of the scary ones that are reoffending and hurting other people in a place where they're not able to do that. And so those two things combined, like I say, I realized pretty quickly in my career that was something that I didn't need to just leave to go pursue something that people thought you should. I did get the opportunity to do that kind of about 10 years into my career. We tested a process by which at that point I was a sergeant, and we were going to work towards dual certifying all of our sergeants. So idea being if you were on duty at the jail as a sergeant and there was some sort of call on patrol that needed some extra help, you would be certified and have some experience. You could go out and help out with that, right?
Easier to redistribute manpower when there's some kind of problem or sickness or that kind of stuff. That makes sense, but I can't imagine how much work goes into double certifying people either.
Yeah, so it was a journey, right? Like I went through the process basically like I was a new patrol officer, went through the academy, spent all that time in the field training process, and I think I was the one that did it, and I think it was really we realized after that it was a huge investment in resources that probably wasn't very likely to be sustainable for the long term, right?
Makes sense.
But it was neat to get out and get that opportunity. I think it made me better at my work in the jail because I got to see, where some of these folks who I was interacting with regularly, how they lived, where their lives were, what their families were like on the outside. Came back into the jail, looked for promotional opportunities, and then have really just been pretty grateful over the last few years to see some of the changes with the jail, the community interest that's really kind of exploded in the last 5 or 6 years. Those folks who provide resources in our community and recognize, I think, that there's an opportunity with the people in the jail to come and see them and visit them and kind of assess them and start a treatment type protocol for whatever that might be in an environment that's pretty safe and secure.
So exactly what we're looking for. And I kind of preach about it all the time, but I want people to get help and like right off the street. But if they won't take the help and they continue to offend and it's causing a problem in the community and there's just so much of that, then I think going to jail for your crimes gives you time to detox or maybe get some mental health treatment. And when I called you back to confirm this appointment, I called through the main line. And being a retired telecom guy, that's interesting to me how a phone system's set up, and I liked it. It got people to the right place relative to the medical department at the jail, and there were other classifications for the help that I think people need, addiction treatment and whatnot. You could get to the right thing. So if they have a chance to detox or a chance to mellow out and talk to somebody, more likely to choose the right path after that than when they're on the street. So I really appreciate how that's set up.
Yeah, anecdotally, you can talk to all of these people in the community who are in recovery, who will tell you, and I think you've had some of the people on this podcast before, who will tell you, it took a dozen times, it took 15 times, totally. It was the 16th, whatever time it was finally where they actually found their bottom and something triggered that idea that they needed some help. And, I've talked to dozens of people who are grateful that the jail was an avenue to that for them. And I know, I think it would be unrealistic to think that could happen for everybody who's addicted or
sure.
Dealing with whatever demons that they have. But I do think it's an opportunity for a lot of those people. And I think, as is pretty widely known in our community, we don't have the ability to support all of that sufficiently right now. And really that's completely due to lack of adequate space. You know?
I'm usually a no tax voter, but I liked the jail district because it had some things embedded into it, like we're talking about, that get people help and enough space to get the community some help. Because I've lived here for almost 30 years, and the crime rate is pretty rough in the last 10. It's gone. I don't know that it's specifically risen. I definitely notice a lot more than I used to. Maybe I'm paying attention more as I was older and I was raising kids and stuff like that, and didn't notice, but the Greenway and things like that. I took my kids down on training wheels. I'm not so sure I will with my grandkids yet.
Well, I think there's a reality in our community right now that there are certain people who know that regardless of how many times they continue to commit these kind of what we deem to be lower level crimes,
right.
There's ultimately no way that they're going to truly be held accountable with jail time.
No.
And that's a scary proposition for any community. I've talked to people, offenders over the years, who say, I know that as long as I don't steal more than X amount of property that's going to make it a felony, I can literally walk into department stores and walk out with whatever I want.
Yep.
Because you don't have room to keep me here at the jail. And I grew up, I was raised by a family that held you accountable at some point, right?
Exactly.
And we got away with stuff at times, but there was a point where there was a line that you couldn't cross, and I think we knew that. And I worry that our community right now knows that that's not necessarily the case all of the time.
Right.
And so that's the incarceration piece, right? The jail really, I think, serves two purposes in a community. One is your support of the legal system and keeping those people safe and secure until they have a chance to go see the judge or the jury or whoever's going to make that final determination. The other part is that link to the social services that are in a community. And quite frankly, with the exception of the most extreme crimes, person-type violent crimes,
right.
We're not serving those purposes very well due only to the lack of sufficient space in our jail.
Yeah, resources, and the judges know, like 12 scheduled for 12 cases, 2 maybe 4 show up.
Yeah, we talk pretty frequently with the judges here in Jackson County, and I think right now there's a big concern again about the fail to appear rate. It's no it's no secret that we had to reduce to meet some of the needs of COVID to keep the people safe in our facility. And so in a jail population that was already too small to meet the needs of our community, we had to reduce that again by close to 30%.
Yeah, I saw that. I got some data from the sheriff and tabulated things up. I don't know if you got to see that, but yeah, it showed 26 to 28% COVID, reducing the space that we already have. And I kind of equated that to, on the week that he gave me, the number of offenses for the releases, and also the number of offenses for people currently stored in the jail. It was like close to 3,000, 2,900 and something different offenses.
Right.
And if I were to tabulate that out for what's probably 80 beds you guys lost relative to COVID, that's 500 and some possible offenses that are running around.
Yeah, and one of the things that's scary about that, we've been in a situation where we've had to do, there's different names in the community for it, the matrix releases, or, we call them force releases. We've had to do that for years. So we reach a capacity of the jail. It's the capacity where we feel that we can safely operate. And it's also the capacity that's kind of been imposed
legal
on
to
us
operate,
legally,
right? There's not. This isn't the wild west. There are federal and state regulations. And even in our county, we're not trying to stack people up like sardines and make things dangerous.
If you look at the original designs of our jail when it was built, the design was started in the late 70s.
82 was when it was
finished
right?
in 81. Yeah. And I have those original plans in my office, and they talk about how this jail facility was built for 186, I believe, people. And if the need ever arose to expand that, we could build additional floors on top.
Not with current earthquake standards.
It was
found
mid-80s
out the jail committee.
Yeah, mid-80s, the earthquake standards all came in. And so we've really done a great job. Jackson County's done a great job. We've had support in creating basically as much jail space as we could from that footprint.
Squeezed more out of it than it was originally made for sure.
Well, what's interesting about that original plan is it said that even if we were able to add additional floors, the maximum that we could support with the infrastructure, right, the kitchen sizes, the laundries, those sort of things, was still under 300. Well, we've been able to operate at 300 for the last few years with some addition of basement jail space. And so we've really, we've looked at a lot of other options. When the new jail plan was proposed, that was after years of looking at ways that we could potentially create more space on that footprint that we have. What sort of exostructure would we need to actually be able to meet earthquake code? And the reality is that building's old enough now, and the infrastructure's not there to really put any more people in it anyway. So the solution has to be able to find either additional offsite space or a brand new facility. And by brand new, that could be a remodel of another building. But we also looked at those possibilities, and the reality is that to meet the security and the kind of minimum care standards, trying to remodel,
it's not easy to retrofit a building to be that secure. My understanding is the most likely suspect for that would be the community justice building where the work release program is in Talent. I live in Talent. I don't have a problem with that. It was originally supposed to be that secure and built after our jail, so probably to a little bit slightly higher standard if it's put back to that. That's still not a lot of beds, right? No,
we actually operated that. The sheriff's office operated that facility until the mid-2000s, and that was a secondary jail. So it was ran as a jail for those people who are convicted to those crimes that should serve their time within the community, right? So kind of misdemeanor, lower-level felony offenders. And so that was under 100 beds in the state that it was at. That's something. Right, so if we could increase our population by 100, that would help us.
It's those 80 COVID beds back and the 26 or 27%.
Yeah, the COVID thing. So again, back to the force release idea. For years, we've had to decide essentially, and this was not a decision made just by the sheriff or the sheriff's office, but we talked to judges, we talked to district attorneys, we talked to the defense bar, and we essentially gave a score for each crime that somebody could allegedly commit. And when they came in, based on those crimes that they were arrested for, we assessed that score, and if they were the lowest score on the list and we had to kick somebody out, that's what we did. Well, with the reduction due to the COVID process,
You dip deeper into the worst crimes, right?
Right. So that number's a little bit higher than it used to be now.
And I've looked and I've heard that over the years with the different stuff that I've focused on and tried to understand from just a citizen's perspective. When I look in the jail or I look at what's currently in the jail, I can't pick anybody to if you said got to get rid of one because we got a worse guy coming in, I'd be standing there with my hands up. So I'm glad you have a system for choosing for us.
Yeah, it's probably the worst regularly occurring process that our shift supervisors have to go through, right?
Yeah, it's not what they're wanting to turn out.
No,
we have a choice.
We get to the point where we do have to release people at times who have committed, again, kind of the lower level, but assault type charges, crimes, and those are the most minor offenses that we have in the jail. I think the last time I pulled the statistics, we have over 90 people in our jail currently who are facing Measure 11 charges.
Right.
So out of the 230 currently, 90 of those are serious.
Yeah, goodbye, my friend. You're off to
felonies.
the pen.
Yeah, if found guilty, they're going to prison for quite a while, and so
that's usually Coffee Creek for us. Is that how it works? Or
that's the intake facility for most of them.
So they go out to Pendleton and other places from there.
Yep. Okay. So everybody funnels through, with the exception of certain crimes. There are certain crimes that if you're found guilty, you go directly to specific prisons. But Coffee Creek's kind of the intake center.
That makes sense.
Now, with the rumored closing of some of the prisons, how's that going to affect the counties?
Yeah, so I think ultimately what happens, those people who are released from prison will still be under local control, and so they'll be on post-prison release. And so I think the way that could potentially affect the counties is if they return here and violate those terms of their parole, they come to our jail, right? And
then they get tossed into that list as in if this guy went away for stabbing somebody, I'll just say he stabbed somebody, assault with a deadly weapon, caused an injury. The prison can't keep them, lets them out. They decide to come home, if this was home, and reoffense, get in a bar fight. Maybe they don't stab anybody this time. Now they've broke that parole, early parole that they got. They didn't actually even maybe serve the Measure 11 if there's not enough space. There's not enough space anywhere. They get taken into your jail. Now you have a guy that stabbed somebody on the list, because I noticed their old crime shows up with a parole violation. I would think, as a citizen, I'd like it to default to the worst, whatever that is. That one should show up there. And then you have to let somebody out.
Yeah, so with those parole violators, we're restricted in some cases about whether or not we can release them at all, right? So if they're under the authority of the state parole board, we typically have to hold on to them at least long enough for that sanction process to occur. And so that does mean that typically those folks who are in that pretrial status are the ones that are regularly being released. And so, I haven't seen exactly what the list looks like of what sort of offenders they're talking about releasing from prisons, but there is that potential that they could come back and take up jail space, right? Assuming they reoffend when they get back here.
Sure. You hope not. You hope
absolutely.
Prison is at least that final straw that says, hey, I want to do something different with my life. Guys, who would you say is responsible for us having more jail beds, or what could end up being prison beds in our community jail? It may not be appropriate to describe it that way, but if what we're talking about were to happen with prisons shutting down space, that could very easily happen. Who's responsible for giving you beds? The community.
Yeah, I think, obviously it all comes down to funding, right?
Yep.
And so there's only a limited amount of resources available within the county in what our current funding structure looks like. And I think the county's done a great job, if you look at the surrounding counties over the last few years, of being able to keep us in a place where we're not having to shut down major portions of our county. We're not having to lay off large numbers of employees. But when we're talking about expanding resources, and jail is maybe one of the most expensive resources that we have, right? And if you're talking about expanding those resources, it's going to require community commitment to some degree.
Excuse me, is there a number what it costs to have somebody in jail per day or month or year, or however you?
So
rough number that people talk about.
It's one of those interesting statistics that really kind of ebbs and flows, and the way you get to it is you look at that total budget and you look at how many people you have in jail at any given time, and you kind of just divide those numbers into each other and you come up with a number. And traditionally that's been somewhere around just a little bit over $100 a day.
Okay.
But then why that's a weird statistic is, like, you look right now with the reductions due to COVID, well, the cost of housing somebody in a jail has not increased by 28%, right? It's still the same price, but we're limited to how many people we can keep there. So,
So the cost per bed went up
when in reality it
because
didn't,
there's a
right?
shortage, like other things that are going on in the pandemic, circuit boards and other stuff. I see in the news that there's a shortage, so they're not manufacturing as many trucks.
Right.
And also, what do you think is enough? Like, how many beds do you think we need as a county?
Yeah, so the National Institute of Corrections has actually come in on behalf of the county a couple times and done these sort of studies, right? And it was an interesting experience because you have these people who are nationally recognized experts in corrections facilities, and they come in and they look at the statistical gathering and some of the things that we've had to do in Jackson County to deal with our problem, and they're a little bit baffled in trying to come up with a number in some cases, right?
I saw that. I read that. I read that report back then. Yeah.
It's pretty interesting, you know. So one of the things, and I thought this was a really good plan with the sheriffs and again the sheriff and the judges and the DA and all of the community justice, criminal justice leadership came together, and we looked at one of these problems that's been ongoing in our community for a long time, and that is that we continue to release these people,
Right.
and then they continue to not appear in court, and so it resulted in this kind of, the revolving door, I think is referred to a lot of times.
Sure.
That had all of these fail to appears in the community. And when the courts were able to pull a list, there were people with 100 fail to appears currently pending in the community.
Yep.
And so a few years back, again, the sheriff working with the other partners in the criminal justice system decided, even though we're stretched on bed space, we're going to reserve up to 10 beds at any given time, and we're going to have a list, the top 40 offenders with failed to appears.
Hold some FTAs till court.
Yep, and the other thing that was great about that program is that if somebody was arrested and was what we termed a chronic failed to appear offender, it also triggered immediate response from resource providers, right? And so there was a network of folks, and we emailed out this name, and if it was believed that there were some addiction issues that were involved in their reoccurring criminality, they'd get involved quickly. And if there were mental health issues, they'd get involved quickly. And if it was livability, housing type stuff, those people would get involved and provide resources. And so we were able to really start affecting some real change in the couple years. That was another thing that had to kind of go by the wayside with COVID.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring that up is because that was one of the examples that the folks from the National Institute of Corrections and then also other jail experts we've had look at our system, they've said to us, just the fact that you had to come up with this plan, like a chronic FTA program, just shows that there are parts of your system that are broken due to lack of jail space, right?
Right.
And so to answer your question, because that was a long answer to your question. But to answer your question, when we looked at what we thought was the optimal amount of jail space for our county, really we tried to look at like a 20-year plan.
Yeah.
And we tried to say, if we're going to build a facility, we want that facility to continue to operate at the needs of the community with expanded growth potential in Jackson County for 20 years. And so, there was a lot said about this number when we did go out to the taxpayers about doubling the population of the jail and all this and that. And the reality was that was a long-term plan. I can tell you right now that from that 300 capacity that we've been operating at, if we only held, this is again kind of anecdotal, there's no data to back this up, but if we only held the amount of people that we force release over the course of like a week, we'd add 150 people to that jail pretty quickly.
Right.
Now, I don't think there are people who would stay long-term necessarily, right? They'd have an opportunity to get in front of the judge, and that's really kind of our primary goal, is to get people to a point where the judge is making that release decision and not the graveyard sergeant in jail.
And the I forget what the judges call them, but they have very specific lists of what the time for the crime is, and they openly admit that they can't actually do that. They can't use that list. It's always reduced because there's no place to put folks. And it's not like we're wanting to store folks. The more people we can get help that don't make it into the jail and don't create offenses and figure out a step up, that's great. But there's always going to be people that won't.
Absolutely.
And that was for about 1,000 beds, right? That the jail district plan.
I think the
Trying to
jail
remember.
district plan, it was actually not
It
quite.
wasn't for all of them at the same time, but it was like the modules so that it could be
Yeah.
built out further.
Yeah, so we started with a facility, I think, that was with an idea that was close to 1,000 if we needed it, right?
Right.
And actually part of how we came up with that number too is we talked to the architectural design experts, and they say to build a modern facility, which is kind of this modular style,
Right.
There's a cost to build a square that's this big that houses this many people. And to meet the needs of your community, you probably need to build 2 of those squares, right? And cutting one of those squares in half is going to cost you about the same price to build it anyway,
Exactly.
right?
You still have to have the same kitchen and the same
Absolutely.
same facilities, the same security, and that kind of stuff. It really seemed to me like that was prudent. What was trying to be done was prudent to me, and I supported it at the time. And when I look at it, everybody says that the original jail that you're in now, it was, by the time they finished it, it wasn't actually up to the standard. So I assumed we needed to play some catch up and move forward. And yes, as society has moved forward, we arrest and incarcerate less people. I realize that. That's fine. But even with that, 200 more beds is like triage at this point. It's not all of a sudden if we add 200 beds or get 100 beds out of the work center, we don't all of a sudden have the problem fixed. That's literally triage. That's literally we get to keep 100 more people from stealing somebody's car tonight.
So I think triage is actually a great way to explain what we would hope to do with an expanded jail facility. Because again, if we being the sheriff's office, the people who are operating the jail facility right now, if we could make kind of our dreams come true, it would be to allow the court system, to allow that portion of the criminal justice system to get the opportunity to see a person and make an informed decision about their release eligibility.
Yes.
Right now what's happening is we have people who come into the jail who are there literally 1 or 2 hours
Yeah.
and have not had an opportunity to see a judge, and we have to base their release eligibility on things like we talked about, the most serious crime that they've committed, what their criminal history looks like. You know, we ask questions about their employment and their housing, and if we had a more robust system that could support it, we could put more weight into those things. But right now we can't. And so just the idea that we could get people an opportunity to see a judge, get a thorough assessment of what their chances of success are if they're released on their own recognizance.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of the ideal plan.
You're obviously a guy that wants folks to have help. But I don't think sometimes the public gets it entirely in context relative to saying we need a 24-hour mental health facility, we need 24-hour addiction beds pick up right now. I agree, but that's not what a jail does. It can help with those things, but the jail isn't responsible for making all those people find all those services. Having the services, having places like Rogue Retreat and other stuff, Addiction Recovery Center, Rock Recovery, wherever they can be referred, if they're willing to actually do it, that's awesome. We want some stuff for them in the jail, but that's not what a jail does. A jail keeps people for court, right?
Yeah, we want to be a safe path to those things too, right?
Yeah.
We want to be a safe place that people can come. We can have a facility that's clean, that has medical care, that has some initial mental health resources for kind of diagnostic things, and we can just get them into that path of community resources. And again, I kind of go back to what we said earlier. Over the last 5 or 6 years, the amount of support that has been shown in this community from private providers, from the CCOs, from the public sector of mental health and public health, the interest they've all shown in trying to find ways to get into the jail and help those people while they're in that secure environment, it's never been better. The frustrating part now is that, like I say, we don't have the opportunity even to get those people an accurate assessment before sometimes we have to release them. And that's unfortunate. That's a shortcoming right now in our community, absolutely.
I know a couple of your deputies, and they absolutely care about the people in your jail. And I don't know. Can you tell us some little stories? There doesn't have to be names involved. And I'm not talking about the criminals, but you have a bunch of guys and gals that work in that jail and work in the office and those kind of things, and they're exposed to a lot of people, and a lot of people that have maybe had a hard life or in a hard situation. Some good relationships happen in the jails between the deputies and what is, I don't know, it's not politically correct to say inmate, I guess now, but adults in
adults in custody.
Adults in custody is the correct term, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think, and I stand by it when I say that of the people and the certain specific elements of law enforcement that I've interacted with, it's impossible or improbable for somebody to work in a jail very long and not become one of the most compassionate pieces of that whole operation. And I think the reason for that is exactly what you just described. I can remember many, many, many times in my career where somebody was in jail just long enough to kind of sober up, and you'd begin to have these interactions with them, and they talk to you about their children, and they talk to you about their dreams, and they talk to you about the things they want to do. And I really do believe that the vast majority, all of the employees that we care to work to keep in our jail facility are people who care and hope that those folks will do well. That creates, I think, oftentimes what can be perceived as a great deal of cynicism for people who work in corrections. And the reason for that is because all too often these people who spend 15 days or 30 days or 60 days with you, and you really are kind of pulling for them, you give them a pat on the back on the way out the door, and you say, best of luck, go do great with your family. And unfortunately, in too many cases, you see just a few days or a couple weeks later, they return, and it's that that cycle of addiction. And so I think that some of the people who I work within the jail over the years, it's easy to develop kind of a thick skin to that, right?
Get a little numb to stuff, yeah.
And another thing that's really tough about working in the jail facility, and this is something that I was lucky enough to get to experience when I worked patrol for a short period of time. But a patrol officer, there's a potential that your first call in the morning can be this kid who's getting ready for school and his bike got stolen, and throughout your 12-hour shift, you could have located that bike, cited the person who stole the bike, and give that bike back to that young person.
Yep.
And that kind of completes this cycle in a day. In a jail, when you work in corrections, rarely do you see the success stories, right? And so you see the people who continue to come back.
Sure.
But you sometimes just kind of forget that so-and-so didn't come back. And to be honest, that's
a good thing, right?
It's absolutely a good thing. But I think that cynical side that happens with that thick skin is when somebody stops coming back, instead of making an assumption that they must be doing better.
Yeah.
I've heard people assume they must have moved out of the area. They must have went to prison from another county, right? And so, the great thing is, again, I've worked here 20 years. I've lived my entire life in Jackson County, except the times I was away in the military. And what that long-term career has led me to be able to experience is I will go to the grocery store, or I had an experience where we had some carpet work done at my house. And the carpet installers showed up one day, and I recognize one of the installers, like kind of the assistant, as somebody who had been in jail, and he had been in jail a lot early in my career. And this was also a guy that I actually had went to like middle school with. So I kind of knew him anyway. And there was this moment at my doorway when we just kind of look at each other, and I'm like, man, you look great, right? There's obviously this physical improvement in people when they break that cycle of addiction.
Color to the face.
Yeah.
And extra weight from having a job and food. And
yeah, he just looked great, and I said, man, what happened to you? I think I even said to him, I kind of thought you might have went to prison. And this is one of those guys who was so deep in the criminality that I think he was like on that old Medford's Most Wanted type thing, right? He was like the top guy.
Sure.
And he was able to tell me, we spent a little time together as he did work at my home, and he was able to just tell me, like, and it went back to the same story. I came to jail that one time. I saw my face on the Medford's Most Wanted page, and I realized, like, my kids need me more than this. And he was able to get the help and the support from the family and the support from the community he needed. And that was a great success story for me, and it was kind of refreshing. and again, it's just not something that I think a lot of people see. But I do want to say this. One of the big things that we've begun to do lately in the jail is find ways for relevant peers to come back and do work in the facility. Prior to COVID, we were working together with community justice, and we had a plan. It's still going to happen for a medicated assisted treatment unit in the jail. And so basically what this was going to be is it was going to be people who are opioid addicted, who were sanctioned to a probation violation or a parole violation. We're going to spend enough time in the jail that we could get them some medication-assisted treatment to help them with their addiction. And part of that deal was that we had these peers coming back to the facility. So many of these peers were people who, in relatively recent history, had spent time in our jail. And they were recognizable folks who had spent time in our jail. And that was a weird interaction when we first brought them into the facility with some of the deputies who had been around for a long time. But so quickly, they recognized that these were success stories, right?
Yep.
And so I think that, as the jail commander
happy
now,
ending you guys usually don't get to see because
Absolutely.
they don't come back to you and you have to guess. They got to see people come back and help.
Yeah. As we come out of COVID, one of my main goals as the jail commander is to find ways to help with that long-term career health, the emotional health of our employees. It's hard working in a jail for 30 years.
I can't imagine.
And so I think those are the ways that we can help our people recognize that they are doing good work,
Yeah. And there's guys that don't want any help, and I get that, and that's okay. But there's another life out there for most of those folks.
Well, and I think what we try to remind our staff is that there are people who don't want help yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And some of the people that come to the facility, and I'll say over 20 years, it's a handful, but we've had people that come to the facility that I think you look at and you think like, that's just a really bad person, right? And
sure.
And
There's
typically
gotta be some evil out there, man.
Yeah, typically the crimes that are associated with that time they come to our facility might be the last time that in my career they're ever going to be back, because they're going to go to prison for a long time.
Right.
But I'm like, I tell you, I think if I ever tried to go through the list of people through my 20-year career that really meet that, I couldn't count them on both my hands.
Yeah, it's not many. Yeah.
Most of the people have just made some mistakes.
Yeah, no doubt. Jared, you had some
Yeah,
questions.
I know that Sheriff Sickler, the last election we had a jail measure that got shot down, and we discussed the jail quite a bit on the scanner page and try to support the sheriff the best way we can as citizens. And the opinion that I developed by listening to people talk is they really don't understand how a jail works. They don't understand the purpose of the jail. They're making assumptions that mental health trumps incarceration, I go back to my old ways of, if someone's not afraid of getting their rear end kicked, then what makes them want to get help? And so the big thing is people were talking about stick 'em in tents and all these where's the medical marijuana money for funding? If you had the option or the opportunity to talk to the citizen and almost make it like this is the 101 of the trifecta of how a jail system works, how would you explain it to the general citizen when we're talking about a jail proposal?
Yeah, so I think that we have to meet those two kind of basic purposes of the jail. We have to have a facility that's big enough to house those people who have been alleged to commit crimes and need to get into the court system. And then we need to have a facility that's not only big enough, but it's also designed in a way that we can get people into the resources that need it. And Ryan mentioned the word triage earlier. I think that's a great way to describe that portion of the jail. We talk a lot about mental health, and I've heard a lot about mental health in the community, and I've heard a lot about addiction in the community and how it relates or doesn't relate to the jail and the need for that jail space for those things. The reality is no one comes to jail if they've not committed an alleged crime. And if the elements don't exist of their mental culpability at the time that crime was committed. And again, that's not our decision to make. That's the district attorney and judge's decisions to make. But while they are in our facility, we need to have a safe place so that we can hook them into those resources. Mental health. So I can tell you what we've done with mental health and housing in our jail just in recent years, and that's this. A lot of people who come into our facility are having some sort of mental health occurrence, right? Crisis, maybe not so much, because I think a lot of the people that are in mental health crisis get diverted to emergency rooms.
Right.
But there are people who are having a mental health situation that come to our jail fairly frequently. And in the jail, because the majority of the facility is a congregate living situation, historically, I think in our jail and I think in a lot of jails, those people have had to be separated from the rest of population. What we recognized in the last few years is that separation doesn't necessarily have to be a long-term deal. It doesn't have to be for the duration of their stay. But it is kind of vital for their safety and for the safety of other people that it happens for a little bit. And so we set up a sequence of housing for people who appeared to be mentally ill, who we knew had a history of mental health concerns, who identified that they had some mental health concerns, wherein they would go to a single person cell for a few days until their behavior started to stabilize. And most everything we do at the jail is behavior based. And so once that behavior began to stabilize, we then moved them into a cell where they just had a single roommate. And we watched that stabilization of behavior and kind of the normalcy sped up.
Yeah.
And then once we did that for a week, we moved them to a place where we could have 2 of those rooms out at once. And so those are the sort of things that a jail, I believe, that a jail should have by design that support the recovery for that. And then at that same time, at the jail, we have 2 full-time mental health professionals who are doing assessments of people, and they are the ones who have those connections back into community health.
Right.
And I think that's the part that really gets missed in this discussion by certain people, is that we don't at all feel like the jail is an end for anybody, right? Very few of those people, and again, it's up to a judge and jury decision down the road at some point, but they're going to go onto the state prison. The prisons have their own resources. We're talking about county jails that house people for a relatively short duration. We don't feel like that's necessarily the end state. It's an avenue to get people to the resources that they need. And if that is, a lot of focus is put on mental health and addiction, there's also a big piece of people who are incarcerated and programming that's just got to deal with cognitive thinking solutions,
Sure.
right? Anger management issues.
Issues, overwhelming sexual desires.
Sure.
There's lots of different categories there. This is what my education, my psychology stuff.
Absolutely.
And they don't all need the same kind of help.
No.
Yeah, the addictions, lots of addictions are similar, whether that be a physical drug or alcohol addiction or a psychological addiction.
Sure.
But I'm just glad there's 2 full-time people that are certified to assess those things and get them to the right place, because somebody that's having a schizophrenic episode is going to be a lot different than somebody that's just really depressed about what's going on in their life and can't pull themselves out. They need a different kind of person to talk to in each of those scenarios.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, those 2 full-time mental health professionals that are at our facility are almost overwhelmed in their caseload with just I said there's not real crisis, mental health crises, but there's a lot of people who have like suicidal 200
to 300 people, that's their caseload, right?
Right. And so they're dealing with reacting to these things as opposed to that kind of counseling portion of it, and that's where we connect back to the community. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I'd really like to mention those people too. A lot of time that we talk about the jail is focused on those uniformed staff that are working in. No, I just wanted to take a minute to talk about those other people who aren't the uniform badge wearing people that work at the jail, right? So we have there are about 60 uniformed people who work in the Corrections Bureau. They do great work. They do the kind of work we've been talking about. There are all these other people, So you talk about our record staff who these are people who saw an application or saw a job posting that was to work in like an office arena, right? And they thought that would be a pretty great place to work. And then the next thing you know, they were working in kind of what can be a stinky, smelly, loud office, and piles of paper. 14,000 people come into our jail every single year, and they take.
Do they get to work in the basement?
No, they work in that right on that main floor.
A little bit of light.
Yeah, but all the hard work that's done, and I've often equated that portion of a jail to a lot like what I think a boarding school, running a boarding school would look like, right? So you have this entire staff of people who are responsible for taking care of all of the grades and the progress of the students. That's kind of what's happening with the adult and custody population. Yeah. And then, we have, we talked a little bit about our 2 mental health providers.
Yeah.
We have a whole team of people who are contracted by the county to provide medical service. And so these folks are there not 24 hours a day. That's something we'd like to get to.
Yeah. But I've seen it. There's a little medical office in there.
Yeah, there's a full clinic in the jail. There's registered nurses. There's a provider that comes in. There's dentists that come in. There's all of the CNAs and the med techs that do all that work and interact with people who have a lot of physical health issues. We have people that come in, professionals that come in and prepare the meals that get served to the population every single day. Just so many people that are kind of the behind the scenes folks that don't get recognized.
That's a hop-in kitchen too.
It is. So I
agree. You got no more space to serve more meals out of that kitchen, right?
I'm convinced, and I've had this discussion with lots of people. I think that our jail kitchen probably prepares and provides more meals each and every year than anybody else in Jackson County. So you figure we have the population of our facility, 3 hot meals a day, the juvenile facility, and the Community Justice Work Center in Talent, and it's 365 days a year.
There's only a handful of places that have your seating capacity either.
Right, yeah.
I'm not on camera, so I winked, but I had a chuckle to make sure you knew I was joking there.
There's a lot of people and a lot of work that's being done. I think that's one of the things that people don't recognize about jails, is the it's a full service operation for the most part, and so obviously there are things that are outside of our expertise. If there's a true medical emergency, we take people to the emergency room just like anybody else would. Yeah. But in a way, almost like
a military base in one building. To me, you have to have medical, dental,
everything,
all the food, all the showers, everything that people do in normal life. You have to have all that stuff. And the people that are in there are not necessarily soldiers. They're not necessarily always cooperative, right?
Yeah,
contraband, and they want to do all kinds of different stuff. And
so the majority of people there, the adults in custody population, follow the rules pretty well.
Do they?
Right? Yeah.
Once they're in, it's a little easier, yeah?
I think that there's, not always, but there's oftentimes this what can we get away with thing. Sure. And so we talk about contraband, and there's kind of 2 classifications. There's the dangerous and the drug contraband stuff. That's the really bad stuff. And then there's other contraband that's more sort of the nuisance. And so when we talk about contraband, just to be clear for whoever's watching, it's anything that technically they're not permitted to have, right? So it's something could be adapted. It could become contraband, or it could be kind of a true smuggling type scenario.
Right. It's not necessarily always what we see in TV shows and movies. It's not always a shank, which is just, lots of Hollywood stuff. You guys probably are not picking up many shanks in the Jackson County Jail, right?
No, if I could probably write a novel about the things that are portrayed about jails in the movies that are not true or very rarely true, right? I think that
there's not a high. I see all of the arrests, and even when somebody gains a charge in jail, it shows up as well. And there's not a ton of drugs moving through the jail. This isn't the prison of TV lore or anything like that.
Yeah. We have significant drug contraband issues. Not in the ways that they're portrayed in jail with kilos of heroin or anything. We have issues with, right now with the opioid crisis happening in the community. I think that people are genuinely scared of withdrawal. And even though we have some medical assisted withdrawal type protocols in the facility, people look for ways to get that opioid fix while they're in, and they find pretty ingenious ways to try to get that past us at times. Though the weapons, not so much, right?
You see them detoxing. I've seen it, and makes me understand why they continue to use for sure. And I can absolutely understand how it scares the hell out of them to detox when they're addicted to heroin, shaking, vomiting, sweats for days, can't control a lot, can't think. I understand why they try to smuggle stuff in.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's very enjoyable. But to that note, you know, I've had interactions. I remember one specifically with a young lady who she was admittedly heroin addicted. She'd been in jail for a couple months. She was I think she was serving some sort of sanction. She'd been there a while, had totally, you know, sobered up. She went through the entire withdrawal process. She was physically sober, and her release date was coming up. She was terrified. She was terrified about what her life was going to be like outside of jail because she was really worried that she was going to go use again. And those are the times that I feel like if we just had a better link to resources for these folks,
something to pick her up out of jail and help her find the path.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that's a real struggle in jail facilities right now is that a lot of the insurance benefit that people have in the community ends when they come to jail, right? Oh. So if you're in the community and you, whether it's physical illness, injury, or mental health or addiction issues, and you've been linked into a provider, when you come to jail, when you're lodged in jail, that lasts for only really a very, very short time. A couple days before that benefit is then cut off. And the jail takes over at that point. I think does a pretty good job of trying to meet the needs of those folks. But then the problem can be upon release, especially an unpredictable release scenario where we don't know when it's going to occur, flipping that switch so that they can then get back on those benefits and linked back into the community providers. And so that kind of, they call it the warm handshake, you know, that sort of transitional care piece is something that due to that rule that currently exists about insurance benefits going away is problematic. And it's not just for those people who are convicted. It's also for those people who are in a pretrial status, right? And I think that's a very important distinction to make about the people who are in our jail. While I have a great deal of trust in law enforcement, I think that they make appropriate arrest decisions the vast majority of the time. Most of the people in our jail are not legally guilty of anything yet.
Right.
And so until
trials take a long time.
Yeah, until they have that opportunity to go to court and to build their defense and have their peace, they're not legally guilty.
And if that's one of the upper level crimes that people end up staying in the jail and not being released for, they have to go through that process, and that's going to be a big trial.
Yeah, we have for those most serious crimes, the murder charges, the serious sex abuse, rape type charges, people will spend 2 or 3 years in our jail at times.
Yeah, just to make it all the way through the court system before they're sentenced to something.
Yeah, it can be a very long process. Yeah,
and or until it's established that there is not enough evidence, or a jury does not believe that they beyond a performance that they did it.
Right.
Yeah. We should probably wrap up here, but what do you think? I had told you when I wanted you to come down and chat with us that I thought the jail is probably like one of the lesser thanked positions in law enforcement, and you've explained a lot tonight about how rewarding that can be. What's it take to be a jail deputy, and maybe something that you think inspires jail deputies in general to just keep trudging along even when it gets pretty hard sometimes.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that one first, right? And
okay.
I think that is the thanks portion of things because it can be a very thankless job. I think it's an oftentimes forgotten part of the law enforcement community, not necessarily within the community. I think that other law enforcement really has a great appreciation for what the jail deputies do, and they express that quite often. But within the community, I think it's misunderstood.
Yeah,
it's kind of this forgotten piece. A lot of times, jail deputies aren't even referred to as law enforcement by members of the community, right? Like I've had people say, like, "Oh, you're a guard," or you know what I mean, like, and so I think it's the thanks part of it. I think that's important. I think that people recognizing that those folks are in there doing hard work is very helpful. And so what's it take to do that? I think that's a great question. We're actually, just last night, I was at a process for an entry-level recruitment, and I kind of talked to the folks that were there about this. And so I want to start by saying, I think for anybody who has a desire to work in law enforcement in any arena, working in corrections is a great way to expand your kind of knowledge base and skills, and it can transfer to any part of law enforcement. And so we hire a lot of people who are new to law enforcement at all. We hire them into the jail, we help them get trained, and they go pursue other things oftentimes. Not always, but it's a regular thing.
Sure.
And so really the basis for like the minimum requirements to work in the jail are the same really to become a patrol officer. Jackson County, so the sheriff's office is the only one that has jail deputies right now. And so if people keep an eye out for that website, we post all the job postings there for entry-level corrections. It's a thorough process, a competitive process, right? So we have a knowledge-based test called the post test. There's a physical agilities portion of that. And then you get into the interview parts of things and the background investigation, which can be really intimidating to people at times. And if people make it through all of those steps, and each time, the pool's whittled down a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And then we get to those kind of mandatory pieces of the psychological exam and the medical exams to make sure you're fit to actually do the job. And then it starts our training process. And so there's an academy for corrections deputies. It's at the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training in Salem. It's a different academy from patrol, but you learn the basic understanding of kind of local, federal, state laws about what it takes to run a jail. And then we go through kind of an on-the-job training process that lasts several months. And it's stressful, but I think there's some misperceptions about what the failure rate is in law enforcement for people in the field training process. I think 9 out of 10 people that we hire at the jail right now make it through that process, and oftentimes the ones that don't are the ones who realize quickly on that this was not really the career they
wasn't
thought
really
it was,
what they
right?
wanted, right?
But especially when people come talk to me, I have young people quite often say, like, I think I want to do that someday. What do I need to do? And I always tell them the same thing, right? It's you need to show continued progress in your life, right? Whether that is you're going to college or you're working at jobs, you just need to be able to show someday to this potential employer that you're making progress in the things that you do. We know that people screw up once in a while. In that background, they're not looking for people who have been squeaky clean their entire life. They're looking for people who didn't make the major mistakes, and when they did make the little mistakes, they adjusted from it, right? Yeah. But it's a very rewarding career. It can be a very rewarding career. It can really kind of open up doors. It's the benefit packages for working for Jackson County and for the sheriff's office are pretty good. You can live a decent life in Jackson County doing that, and I really encourage people to look into it. And I will say too, when I started at the jail, it was a secret place, sort of, right? Yeah. 20 years ago, we didn't open the doors very often to the public. We talked about what we did, but it was like just kind of you didn't want to say
There's
a lot
some
about
mystique
it.
there still. Honestly,
There is.
I think people see the big cement bunker, man.
Yeah.
And people don't go inside of there unless they have a relative or a friend that they were the first call for, or maybe somebody they were out with that got a Dewey and they want to go pick them up. Or what. Most people don't see the inside of a jail. They see just that front desk area, I think.
Well, we're trying to change that a lot. We've really worked hard in the last few years to try to open up those doors to the public. We're not keeping secrets in there.
Yeah.
And I think that the sheriff's office offers, as do other municipal police departments locally, we offer opportunities like the Citizens Academy, things like that for people who are really interested in what it is that we do. And I really strongly encourage people to reach out and look for those avenues and try to find a way. If you want to learn more about the facility, whether that's as a potential career or just because you're a community member who's interested,
For sure.
look for those opportunities. Once we get out of COVID, right?
Right.
We got to wait a little bit of time before we can start
Definitely.
that stuff back up. But I think it's important for. I especially think it's important for people who are going to be vocal about their position in the community to understand what that position
I agree.
is. And so we encourage people to do that. you can always reach me through the switchboard, kind of like you mentioned earlier. Like I'm willing to talk about jails all day long to people. So.
Well, we wanted to give you and the people that work for you props, and it's a hard situation to have a jail that's too small. I appreciate all the extra effort you have to go through. I mean, it's kind of like if you have to work on a little bit of a jalopy because that's what you're driving. Feels different than a Mercedes-Benz. If we had a brand new jail, things would be a lot less stressful, I think. So
we're not necessarily looking for a Mercedes-Benz.
Exactly.
We want kind of the new Honda.
I didn't think the
right?
last
Something
one
that's
was.
gonna
I didn't
last a
think the
while.
last idea was a Mercedes-Benz at all. But there's, it feels different to work in what the citizens are currently willing to afford.
Sure.
That situation. So we appreciate you guys far beyond that. I really appreciate that you and your people care about people and talk to people in there and maybe create some relationships that have some effect later, because you never know. So just a few wise words from somebody that they could respect means the world. It could change their life.
Well, no, I appreciate that, and I can tell you, and I think on behalf of the folks that I work with, I can say I appreciate this format and getting the opportunity to come and just talk about the jail, because like I say, it's not something that people ask questions about a whole bunch, and so I appreciate you guys having taken an evening and giving me the chance to talk about it a little bit. And if you ever have questions,
for sure,
absolutely.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for coming, and thanks for watching.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Scanner Group Crowdsourced Crime and Safety Podcast with Ryan Mallory and Jared Bannery from ThiefHunter Labs. Make sure to subscribe today for notifications about the next show. Visit us at www.thiefhunterlabs.com or on Facebook as Thief Hunter Labs in the search bar.